Put it down, Mara. Just put the tray down and walk away. She told herself that every single morning, every shift, every time Dennis Frell's voice cut across the diner like a blade looking for something soft to land on. She told herself that, and then she picked the tray back up because the rent was due and her son needed new shoes, and there was nowhere else to go in Maple Ridge that would hire a woman with no college degree and a gap in her work history she couldn't explain without telling the truth. And the truth was the one thing she couldn't afford. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Mara Calloway had perfected the art of being invisible. It wasn't something she'd set out to learn. It had come the way most survival skills come, slowly through repetition, through consequence, through the specific kind of education that only pain can provide. She knew which floorboard near table 7 creaked if you stepped on it wrong. She knew that the coffee carafe on the left ran 3 degrees hotter than the one on the right. She knew that Dennis Frell's mood could be read in the set of his shoulders before he ever opened his mouth, and that when those shoulders rode up tight toward his ears, sometime around the 9 o'clock hour, the smartest thing she could do was find something to wipe down on the far side of the diner and stay there until it passed. She had been working at Patty's Corner for 4 years. She knew every regular's order by heart. She knew which booth needed an extra napkin folded under the leg to stop the wobble. She knew the sound the espresso machine made when it was about to spit steam at whoever was standing closest, and she'd learned to step back a half second before it happened. What she did not know, what she had stopped allowing herself to think about, was what came next. Not after this shift, not after this month, not after any of it. Next was a word that required a kind of hope she didn't keep in stock anymore. The morning started like every other Tuesday. She clocked in at 6:45, tied her apron strings twice because the first knot never held, and poured herself the first half cup of coffee she'd actually get to drink before the rush hit, and everything became motion. Linda Garver was already at table 3 with her reading glasses and her crossword, same as every morning for the last 11 years. Earl Potts had his usual corner stool at the counter, hat on, not speaking, nursing his decaf, and watching the parking lot like it owed him an explanation. The Kimball brothers came in at 7 sharp, same as always, and ordered the same 2 plates they'd been ordering since before Mara ever set foot in this town. She moved between them all, like water moving around stones, easy, practiced, purposeful, smiling when she was supposed to smile, laughing when a laugh was expected, refilling without being asked, anticipating before anyone had to reach. Dennis watched from behind the register with the particular expression he wore when things were going exactly the way he wanted them to, which was to say quietly, efficiently, without anyone giving him cause to step in and demonstrate what stepping in looked like. She kept the concealer thick that morning, thicker than usual. The bruise along her left cheekbone was 4 days old, which meant it was in that ugly transitional stage, no longer the deep plum black of the first day, not yet the faded yellow-green of the last. It sat somewhere in between, and no amount of makeup fully covered that in-between place. She'd done her best in the bathroom mirror at 5:30 that morning, blending careful as a painter, working on something fragile, and she told herself it looked fine. She told herself a lot of things that weren't strictly true. Linda Garver looked up from her crossword when Mara brought her second cup and said, "You look tired, honey." "Long week," Mara said. "It's Tuesday." "Long week already." Linda made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite argument and went back to her puzzle, and Mara moved on. She was behind the counter refilling the syrup dispensers when she heard it. Not a sound she recognized at first. More like a change in the air, a low vibration that arrived before the actual noise did, like how you feel thunder in your chest a second before you hear it with your ears. Then it resolved into something distinct and unmistakable: engines. Multiple engines. The deep rhythmic rumble of motorcycles running in formation, and there were enough of them that the coffee cups on their hooks trembled just slightly, just enough that Earl Potts looked up from his decaf and said, "Hell is that?" Then they pulled in. Mara looked up through the front windows and stopped counting after 12. They came in a tight formation that spread wide as they took the lot, big machines, most of them chrome, catching the morning light. Riders in black leather, road-worn and unhurried, moving with the loose confidence of men who had covered distances and seen things and arrived on their own terms. They took their time cutting engines. They took their time getting off. There was a deliberateness to it, a kind of practiced ease that wasn't performance, it was just how they moved. Linda Garver set down her crossword pencil. Earl Potts sat a little straighter on a stool. The Kimball brothers exchanged a look over their eggs, and Dennis Frell from behind the register went very still. The patches were visible when the door opened, and the first ones came through the red and white colors. The name that didn't need explaining in any American town, regardless of size. Hell's Angels. The words sat on their backs with the comfortable authority of something that had been there a long time. They filed in without rushing, without theater taking up the space that was available to them, which was most of the diner. Mara's first instinct was to disappear into the back. Her second instinct, which hit half a second later, and which she had learned to listen to more carefully, was that disappearing right now would be more visible than staying put. She picked up her order pad and moved toward them because that was her job, and doing her job was the safest thing she knew. The man who sat down at the largest booth in the back was the last one through the door. She noticed him the way you notice a shift in atmospheric pressure, not because he was loud, not because he demanded it, but because the men around him adjusted their movement to account for him without appearing to do so consciously. He was somewhere in his 50s, thick through the shoulders and chest, gray-haired with a kind of face that had been weathered by time and by choices and by weather itself. He moved slowly, deliberately. He sat down like a man who had earned the right to take his time with things. He looked around the diner once, his eyes found her. Mara looked away first. She went to the nearest table, which was 3 bikers who wanted coffee, black and whatever the breakfast special was, and she got their order and moved efficiently and did not look back at the large booth. She topped off Earl's decaf. She brought the Kimballs their check. She did everything that needed doing in the precise order it needed to be done. But she could feel his attention the way you feel a finger of cold air from a cracked window. Not aggressive, not predatory, just there. Present in a way that most people's attention wasn't. Most people looked at her the way people look at wallpaper. This man was looking at her the way someone looks at something they're trying to understand. She didn't like it. Or more precisely, some part of her that she had spent a very long time suppressing recognized it, and the recognition made her chest tight. She took the large booth's orders without meeting anyone's eyes directly. Coffee for the table, eggs, various ways, toast. She wrote it down in her neat small handwriting and said, "I'll have that out short," and turned to leave. "Miss," the voice was low, not a voice that required volume to carry. She stopped, turned back, made herself look. He had pale gray eyes, steady, the kind of eyes that didn't do much moving around but took in everything anyway. "Could I get a glass of water? Ice water if you've got it." "Of course," she said. She went to the water station, filled a glass, brought it back, set it down. He watched her do all of this without comment. Then just as she was turning, "Thank you, Mara." She stopped again. The name tag, of course. She'd worn it for 4 years and still occasionally someone using it startled her. "You're welcome," she said, and moved away, and told herself the tightness in her throat was nothing. Dennis pulled her aside at 8:15. He did it the way he always did, not dramatically, not loudly, just a hand on her elbow that steered her toward the hallway by the back office, away from tables, away from witnesses. "Keep the turnaround tight on those big tables," he said. "I don't want them camped here all morning. They just ordered. I'm aware of that." His voice was flat and even, the way a road is flat and even right before it drops. "I'm saying after. Keep it moving. It's a diner, Dennis. People eat and leave." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, the way the surface of water shifts when something moves underneath. "Don't get smart with me," he said. "Not today." She looked at the middle of his chest because looking at his face was something she had trained herself not to do in moments like this. "Okay," she said, "and fix your makeup. You look—" He made a gesture vague and dismissive. "Just fix it." He walked back to the register. She stood in the hallway for a count of 3. Then she went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The concealer had shifted. The bruise was showing again along the outer edge of her cheekbone, a shadow that didn't match the rest of her face. She pressed the pad of her finger against it gently and looked at her own reflection and thought about nothing. Blank, white, the inside of a piece of paper. That was the thing about survival. It required a certain capacity for blankness, for not letting the thought complete itself, for stopping the sentence before it could reach its period. She fixed the concealer as best she could and went back out. He was still watching when she returned to the floor. She served the large booth their breakfast plates distributed with precision, no wobbling, no hesitation, refills anticipated before anyone asked. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. There had been a time when that had felt like something to be proud of, but that time was distant enough now that she couldn't quite recall the texture of it. "Everything look all right?" she asked the table. General, not directed. "Looks great," said one of the men younger with a red beard and an easy grin. "Best spread we've seen all week." "Appreciate that," she said. "Long ride this morning," said another voice. She processed the words a beat late because the question wasn't directed at any of his guys. It was directed at her, and it was the gray-eyed man who'd asked it, and the specific shape of the question was the kind that had nothing to do with motorcycles and everything to do with her face. She looked at him. "Just the usual Tuesday," she said. He nodded, slow, like he was filing that response away somewhere. "You from Maple Ridge?" "Long enough to be," she said. "Good town." The question was simple. The question was impossible. "It has its moments," she said carefully. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly conversational, not invasive, not leering, just considered. The way a doctor looks at something they're not certain about yet, not because they can't see it clearly, but because they want to be sure of what they're seeing before they say it out loud. Then he picked up his fork and looked at his plate and said, "Thank you, Mara," again. She walked back to the counter and found that her hands were not entirely steady. It was Earl Potts who provided the first complication. Earl was not a complicated man. He was 73 years old, a retired postal carrier who had lived in Maple Ridge for 50 of those years, and his relationship to the world had simplified itself down to coffee, crosswords from a distance, and whatever conversation inserted itself without him having to go looking for it. He was not a gossip. He was simply a man who had been present long enough to know things. He leaned over to Mara when she came to check his cup and said just quietly, "You know who that is." "Big table," he clarified when she didn't respond fast enough. "The one in the back, gray hair, sits like he owns the floor under him." "I know they're customers," she said. Earl made a sound that was not agreement and not disagreement. "Rex Malone," he said. "Unless I'm wrong, which I ain't, heard his name about, 15, 16 years back. Situation over in Clearwater County." He paused. "Situation got resolved." "Okay," Mara said. "I'm not telling you to be scared," Earl said. "I'm telling you so you know." He looked at her sideways, which was Earl's version of directness. "People like that, they got a way of seeing things that regular people miss. You understand me?" She understood him. She wished she didn't. "Michael." The diner filled up the way it always did between 8 and 9, the second wave people who dropped kids at school or finished early errands coming in for the late breakfast or the first real coffee of the day. The noise level climbed. Orders compounded. The kitchen got loud and tight. Mara moved faster. Faster meant less time standing still. Less time standing still meant fewer opportunities for anyone to look at her with the particular expression that Earl had just been wearing. She knew that expression. She had been on the receiving end of it from Linda Garver and from Betty Cho at the pharmacy and from the new pediatrician in town who had looked at her son's file and then looked at her and asked very quietly whether everything was all right at home. She had told him yes, same as she told everyone. The lie had gotten easier over time. It shouldn't have. She knew it shouldn't have. But the alternative required a next, and she had already established that next was something she didn't keep. She was carrying a full tray, 6 plates, breakfast specials, and sides coffee carafe wedged under one arm across the floor when it happened. Dennis materialized at her left, not unusual. He moved through the floor, sometimes checking on things, maintaining what he called presence and what the staff called surveillance. She was aware of him and kept moving. He stepped slightly into her path, not fully, not enough that she could point to it clearly afterward. Just enough. She compensated, shifted her weight. The carafe wobbled, and she caught it, but the correction sent the tray tilting, and there was a half second where physics was the only thing in control, and physics was not interested in mercy. 2 plates hit the floor. The carafe caught the edge of a chair and went sideways, coffee spreading across the tile in a dark, spreading fan. The diner went quiet. Not completely. But the way a crowd quiets when they feel the register of something shifting from ordinary noise to something that requires attention. Mara was already crouching. She was already picking up what she could pick up and assessing what was broken and calculating the cost of what was broken against the next 2 weeks of shifts, and she was doing all of this before she had time to feel anything, because feeling things required the space of a breath, and she had not taken a breath yet. Mara, Dennis's voice, she kept collecting. Mara, sharper. She stood, both hands full of broken pieces. He was looking at her the way he looked at things that disappointed him. The expression was almost bored. Almost. The something underneath it was not bored at all. This is exactly, he stopped. Started again with the kind of deliberate patience that is not patience at all. This is exactly the kind of thing I've been talking to you about. You're rushing, you're not paying attention. You had one job on this tray and I had 6 plates and a carafe, she said, quietly. She didn't know she was going to say it until it was out. His expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. Don't interrupt me, he said. You'll clean this up and it comes out of today's tips. You understand that. She understood that. She understood a great many things. Yes, she said. Good. He straightened, looked around the diner as if assessing the audience, looked most specifically, she realized, at the large booth in the back. Then he walked back to the register. The diner noise resumed slowly, the way noise resumes when people decide they didn't see what they think they might have seen. Linda Garver went back to her crossword. The Kimball brothers were already gone. Earl Potts had not moved, but his cup was down, and he was looking at the table in front of him with the expression of a man who has witnessed something he cannot do anything about. Mara went to get the mop. She kept her face arranged, neutral. She was good at that too. She did not look at the large booth. She did not look at any of it. She looked at the floor in front of her, and she cleaned up what needed cleaning, and she picked up the new plates that had been remade in the kitchen, and she distributed them with precision and said sorry for the wait to each table as though nothing had happened at all. At table 2, the young woman with the infant looked up at her and said, "Are you okay?" "Of course," Mara said and smiled and moved on.
Tomorrow.
She was in the back by the water station when she registered that someone had come up beside her. She turned braced and stopped. It was him, the gray-eyed man, Rex Malone. If Earl was right, which Earl seemed certain he was standing a reasonable distance away. Not crowding, both hands loose at his sides. He had the stillness of someone who has chosen stillness deliberately. He said, "He do that on purpose, step into you." She looked at him. She let herself look at him directly and consider the question, and the question itself was so precise, so specifically accurate about what had happened, that the accuracy of it was more frightening than the question. "I lost my grip," she said. He didn't respond to that. He looked at her and she understood that he had watched the whole thing, and he was not asking her what happened. He was asking her something else. He was asking whether she knew the difference between an accident and a decision, and whether she was willing to say so out loud in a diner in Maple Ridge on a Tuesday morning. "Are you all right?" he asked, not for the first time she somehow felt, not in the way of someone asking for the first time. "I'm fine," she said. The 2 words she had said more than any other 2 words in the last 4 years. He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved once briefly to the side of her face, not the obvious side, the left side where the concealer was doing its imperfect work. He looked back at her eyes. "Okay," he said, "just that." He went back to his booth. She stood at the water station for 4 seconds, which was the longest she could afford, and then she moved. But something had changed. She couldn't name it, couldn't locate it precisely. It was like the moment when you've been in a cold room so long, you stop registering the cold, and then someone opens a door and the air shifts, and suddenly the cold is real again. Something had changed. She didn't know yet whether that was good or whether it was dangerous. In Maple Ridge, those 2 things had a long history of being the same. She told herself it meant nothing. That was the first thing she did after Rex Malone walked back to his booth. She constructed the argument brick by brick that the exchange had been ordinary. A customer asking if she was okay after she dropped a tray. Common decency, the kind of thing that happened in diners all across America every single day. She had read too much into his eyes, and too much into the silence, and too much into the way he'd said okay, like he was filing a report rather than accepting an answer. She was good at this too, the construction of ordinary explanations for things that didn't feel ordinary. She'd had years of practice, Years of taking the thing that felt wrong and building a reasonable story around it until the wrong feeling had somewhere to hide. She moved through the next 40 minutes on muscle memory. Coffee here, ticket there. Check for table 6, refill for table 2. The young mother with the infant who kept looking at her with that soft, careful expression that Mara had learned to deflect with a smile and a question about the baby's age. Table 9 wanted the biscuits and gravy, which meant a ticket to the kitchen, which meant passing within Dennis's eye line, which she did without incident, without eye contact, without anything registering on either of their faces, because that was the choreography they had developed over 4 years, and it worked because they both performed their steps. The bikers ate without trouble. They were in fact the easiest table she'd managed all morning. No modifications, no complaints. Good tippers from the first round of coffee. A couple of them were loud in the comfortable way that men get loud when they're relaxed and among their own, swapping conversation across the table about roads and distances, and something about a bike that needed a carburetor she caught pieces of without meaning to. They occupied space generously, but not aggressively. They ate like men who had been riding since dawn and were genuinely glad to be sitting still. Rex ate without talking much. He listened. That was the thing she kept noticing, despite her best efforts not to notice anything about him specifically. While his guys talked, he listened. He tracked the room the way a man tracks a room when he's done it long enough that it's not a decision anymore, just a function, like breathing. His eyes moved, settled, moved again. They settled on her more than once. She didn't acknowledge it. She was extremely skilled at not acknowledging things. It was Linda Garver who complicated that strategy. Linda had finished her crossword and was on her second coffee and had transitioned, as she sometimes did, into what Mara privately thought of as her social committee mode, the place where Linda stopped being simply a customer and started being a weather system. Linda knew everyone in Maple Ridge, had opinions about all of them, shared those opinions with the particular confidence of a woman who had outlasted enough local scandals to have achieved a kind of authority by sheer duration. She flagged Mara down at 9:10 and said in a voice that was quieter than her normal voice but not quiet enough, "That man in the back booth keeps looking at you. He's just eating Linda. Mara, I've been married twice and I know what a man looking like that looks like. He's a customer. He's a very observant customer." Linda wrapped both hands around her cup. "The kind of observant that's looking at your face specifically." Mara felt the blood move in her chest. "My face is fine." Linda said nothing. Linda did not need to say anything. Linda had a way of deploying silence that was more articulate than most people's sentences, and this particular silence said, "We both know that isn't true, and we've both been pretending it is for long enough." "I'll bring you a warm-up," Mara said, and took the coffee pot and moved away before Linda could deploy any more of it. She lasted 6 minutes before Dennis found her again. He did it in the kitchen this time, which was where he did it when he wanted no audience at all. She was picking up 2 plates for table 4 when he stepped in and positioned himself so that leaving required passing close to him. "You talk to them?" he asked. "I take their orders." "Don't get smart. The bikers. You talk to them beyond the order." She looked at the plates. One of them asked if I was okay after the tray. Something moved across his face. Brief, gone quickly. "What did you say?" "I said I was fine." "Good." He didn't move yet. "These people," he stopped, restructured. "Places like this, reputation matters. We get a certain type of regular, and that type of regular expects a certain type of experience. You understand that?" "I understand that. So keep it professional. Take the order, bring the food, move on." He paused. "Don't give them a reason to extend the stay." She said, "Of course," and he stepped aside and she carried the plates out. But she was thinking about the way he'd said "these people." The weight on it, the specific flavor of anxiety underneath it. Dennis Frell was not a man who felt anxiety easily or showed it when he did. The fact that it had surfaced enough to flavor his words told her something. He was not irritated by the biker's presence. He was unsettled by it. That was different. That was significantly different. And she filed it away in the part of her that was always quietly taking inventory of the things she was not supposed to notice. Rex Malone asked for his check at 9:40. She brought it, set it on the table, began the automatic pivot to leave, and his voice caught her again. "Those eggs were good," he said. "Tell whoever made them." "I will." Long morning, he asked. She looked at him. Every morning's long. Yeah. He looked at the check without picking it up. You've been here a while at this place. 4 years. He nodded. Good tips. The question was strange enough that she answered it honestly before she could calculate whether honesty was strategically sound. Decent enough. Owner treat people right. The air in the immediate vicinity of the booth changed temperature. She felt it the way you feel a door open in winter. He runs a clean diner, she said. Rex looked at her then, and what was on his face was not pressure, and it was not aggression, and it was not anything she had a ready-made defense against. It was just patience. The specific, unhurried patience of someone who has time and knows it and is not going to use it against you. Sure, he said. Just that. He pulled out his wallet, set cash on the check. She could see from where she stood that it was significantly more than the amount on the ticket. You have a good rest of your day, Mara. She picked up the check holder. The cash inside was almost double the ticket. She stood there holding it and looking at the table, which was now empty because Rex and the men around him were already moving toward the door with that same unhurried ground-covering ease. She thought tip. She thought it's just a tip. She thought stop it. She brought the change to the register and Dennis intercepted it. He looked at the cash, looked at her. How much over? I didn't count it. He counted it. She watched his face process the number. They must want something, he said, not to her specifically, more to the air in front of him. They ate breakfast, she said. Some people tip well. Nobody tips that well without wanting something. She carried the empty tray back to the station and did not argue the point, because arguing points with Dennis required an appetite for outcome that she had not had in a very long time. So they didn't leave. That was the first thing she registered when she came back out onto the floor at 10:15 after a 10-minute break that she'd spent in the bathroom pressing cold water against her wrists because her hands wouldn't stop their low-grade trembling. She'd told herself it was the coffee. It wasn't the coffee. They didn't leave. The large booth was being reoccupied. Half the men had gone outside. She could hear the occasional idle of engines being checked, the low conversation of people passing time outdoors. But Rex Malone was still in the booth. 3 of his men still with him. Cups refilled at some point she'd missed. Settled in with the ease of people who had determined collectively that they were not done here yet. Dennis registered it from the register. She watched his jaw set. She went to the booth because that was her job and stood at the edge of it and said, "Something else I can get you." "More coffee when you get a chance," said the red-bearded one whose name she'd gathered from the others was Colby. "Sure." She brought the carafe back. Poured, moving around the table. Rex's cup last because his cup was on the far side. As she poured, he said quietly, not looking up, "Is there somewhere else in town you could work?" The carafe stopped moving. She looked at the top of his head. He raised his eyes to hers after a moment. "I'm not being funny," he said. "I'm asking a real question." "I work here," she said. "I know you work here. I'm asking if that's the only option." Her heart was doing something irregular and unwelcome. "It's a small town." "Most are." He picked up his cup. "You got family here, my son." Something shifted in his expression. Just slightly, just enough. "How old?" "7." He nodded, set the cup down. "What's his name?" She should not answer that. She should redirect, pivot, deploy the smile that ended conversations. Instead, she heard herself say, "Jake." Rex said, "Jake's lucky to have somebody working as hard as you." She had been told a number of things over the years. She had been told she was difficult and clumsy and too sensitive and not trying hard enough, and that she brought things on herself. She had been told she was lucky to have what she had. She had been told in various formulations that the shape of her life was a result of her own choices and that she should be grateful for what remained. Nobody had said that to her in a long time. Nobody had looked at what she was doing, the shifts in the tray, in the concealer, in the smile, and the 4 years of showing up and the constant grinding performance of ordinary, and identified it as hard work that benefited someone she loved. She felt something move behind her sternum that she didn't have a name for quickly enough to stop it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out almost right. She walked back to the counter. Linda Garver was watching her with an expression that Mara chose aggressively not to read. The second wave of the morning crowd thinned out around 10:30, and the diner moved into that mid-morning lull that was its own particular kind of quiet. A few tables nursing final coffees. No new orders coming in the kitchen, winding down from the rush. Mara cleared and reset and wiped down and moved through the lull the way she always did, with the slightly unfocused efficiency of someone operating on autopilot because the manual self had been running on fumes since 6:45. Dennis called her to the back at 10:40. The back was the office hallway. 2 steps past the office door was a storage alcove where no one from the floor could see. She knew this geography the way she knew all the geography of Patty's corner in her body before her mind. She went because not going was its own set of consequences. He was standing just inside the office doorway, which was better than the alcove. Slightly better. "Those men are still here," he said. "I know." "You know why?" She looked at the middle of his chest. "Coffee." "Don't be cute." His voice had the low, compressed quality it got when he was working to maintain a register. "I asked you not to engage beyond the basics." I took their order, refilled their coffee. They asked me questions, and I answered them. "What kind of questions?" If the eggs were good, how long I'd worked here. His eyes moved over her face. She kept her expression level, which she was extraordinarily good at by now. "And you answered." Refusing to answer a customer's basic questions is, "I'm not talking about basic questions, Mara." He stepped slightly closer, not touching. He almost never needed to touch to make the distance feel gone. "I'm talking about you deciding on your own what constitutes basic." She said nothing. "These men show up, leave a pile of money, ask my waitress personal questions, and nobody thinks that's something I should be informed about. I'm informing you now." The quiet stretched for 3 seconds. 4. "Get back out there," he said. "And if they ask you anything else, anything that's not about the menu, you tell me. You understand?" "Yes," she said. She walked back out. Her hands were not entirely steady again, and this time she didn't bother telling herself it was the coffee. Chatun. Earl Potts was still at the counter when she came back out, which was unusual for this hour. Earl typically was gone by 9:30 back to whatever retired postal carriers did with the middle of their mornings. But he'd ordered a slice of pie cherry, which he only ordered when he was staying, and he was eating it in small, methodical forkfuls and watching the large booth without appearing to watch it. She refilled his coffee without him asking. "You talked to him," Earl said. "He talked to me." "What did he say?" She considered. "He asked about my son." Earl put his fork down. He looked at his pie for a moment, and then he looked at her with the sideways expression that was his version of full eye contact. "Rex Malone," he said, "is not a man who asks about people's children to make small talk." "Earl, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's intentional. That man doesn't do anything that isn't intentional." He picked up his fork again. "I heard about a situation in Dallow Springs maybe 8 years back. Restaurant owner there, bad business, took advantage of his staff in ways that weren't just about the work schedule. Rex came through with some of his guys for a poker run, and they stayed a week." Earl took a bite of pie Chewed swallowed. By the time they left, that owner was facing 3 separate counts, and 2 employees had lawyers. Mara stood very still. "I'm not saying that's what this is," Earl said. "I'm saying Rex Malone notices things that regular people walk past. And when he notices something, he doesn't unnotice it." She said, "Earl." "I know," he said. "I know. Just eat something today. Would you? You look like you skipped it." She hadn't eaten. She almost never ate during shifts. There was always something that needed doing and food required. The pause of sitting and sitting required stopping and stopping. Stopping was when the thoughts arrived. She went to check on table 9. Rex was still there at 11:15. His guys rotated, some came in, some went out. There was an easiness to it that suggested they had nowhere specific to be and had decided this particular diner was a fine enough place to wait for wherever they were going. They were generating enough business honestly that Dennis couldn't find a financial argument to push them out. And she understood that he understood this, and she understood that the understanding was making him tight in a way he hadn't been tight when the morning started. She was passing the large booth, not stopping, just in transit, when Rex said her name again. "Mara." She stopped, turned, waited. He wasn't looking at his phone or his coffee or anything on the table. He was looking at her, full attention. The kind most people parceled out in pieces without even realizing it. "You ever get a break in the morning?" he asked. "Not usually until 11:30. "Okay," he said. "If you get one and you want to, there's a bench out front. I'll be around." He paused. "No obligation." She looked at him. "Why?" The question was blunter than she intended. It arrived without the packaging she usually wrapped things in. He didn't seem bothered by it. "Because you haven't told anyone the truth in a long time," he said. "And sometimes it's easier to start with someone who doesn't know your whole story yet." The diner noise continued around them. Orders called, coffee cups touching saucers, the clatter of the kitchen, Linda Garver laughing at something. All of it continued exactly as it always did. Mara stood at the edge of the booth and looked at Rex Malone and felt the thing in her chest that was not hope. She had been very careful for a very long time not to let hope get traction, but that was adjacent to hope, bordering it, close enough to share a fence line. "I have tables," she said. "I know," he said, 11:30. She walked away. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She walked back to the counter and picked up the coffee carafe and moved to the next table and poured the next cup and smiled at the next customer and said, "You doing all right this morning?" the way she had said it 10,000 times. But her 11:30 break, for the first time in 4 years at Patty's Corner, diner felt like something other than 30 minutes of quiet standing in the back with a half-eaten sandwich. It felt like a decision she hadn't made yet. And the unmade decision was the most alive thing she'd felt in longer than she could honestly remember. Across the diner, Dennis Frell watched from behind the register with his jaw set and his shoulders riding high toward his ears. And Earl Potts finished the last of his cherry pie and did not leave. She made it to 11:20 before Dennis took her breakaway. He didn't announce it. He never announced anything that could be construed as a decision. He simply created conditions. At 11:18, he told her the lunch prep needed hands and that Sandra had called in sick and that Mara was the most experienced person on the floor. So naturally, she'd understand that breaks were a flexibility, not a guarantee, and that a good employee understood the difference between what was written on a schedule and what a business actually needed. She understood. She had always understood. Understanding was what she did. She said, "Of course," and went to help with lunch prep and did not look at the bench out front and did not look at the large booth where Rex Malone sat with his third coffee and whatever patience that man was built from, which appeared to be inexhaustible. She chopped onions for 20 minutes. Her eyes watered, which was the onions, which was only the onions, and she was very clear with herself about that. At 11:40, Colby, the red-bearded one, came to the counter and ordered a slice of pie and asked Mara pleasantly if they were keeping her too busy for a break. She looked at him. "It's a busy morning." "Sure," he said. He looked at the pie. He looked back at her with the casual ease of a man who was not actually asking about pie or breaks. "Rex has been coming into diners since before I was writing. Knows how they work. Knows when something's not working right." He picked up his fork. "He's patient, real patient. But he doesn't forget why he stopped somewhere." She didn't answer that. She brought 3 lunch tickets to the window and called the orders and moved to table 7 and smiled at the couple who'd come in and asked if they'd decided and wrote down 2 club sandwiches and went back to the counter. But the words sat in her, "He doesn't forget why he stopped somewhere." Neither did she. She was just less certain than he apparently was that stopping somewhere ever changed anything. The lunch rush arrived at noon with the reliable violence of a tide that didn't care what was happening on shore. Every table filled. 3 more orders than the kitchen could run clean. Dennis was on the floor himself, which he rarely did during lunch, and the fact that he was there moving, watching, maintaining, told her the biker's extended presence had pushed something in him that he was now working to compensate for through volume of activity. Rex didn't leave. That was the fact that sat in the center of everything else. She was managing 6 tables and a counter section and tracking 4 orders at the window and running coffee, and the entire time in her peripheral vision that booth existed. He'd moved a couple of his men outside after 11, keeping the footprint smaller, giving Dennis less surface area to object to. 2 men with him now. Quiet. Rex with what looked like a cup of coffee he'd stopped drinking and a phone he wasn't really using. Watching. Not in a way that would photograph as anything. Not aggressive, not strange, just present. The way a fixed point is present, something you navigate by without necessarily looking at directly. Table 4 wanted ketchup. Table 9's order was wrong and needed to go back. Table 2, the young mother had managed to knock her son's juice off the high chair tray and was apologizing to Mara before Mara even had the paper towels in her hand, saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, with the frayed energy of a woman who was sorry for taking up space in general. Please, Mara said, don't apologize, it's juice. She cleaned it up. She looked at the woman, maybe 25 dark circles, a baby who was smiling, because babies were reliably the only people in any given room who had no idea what was wrong, and she said, you're doing great. The woman's eyes went bright immediately, the way eyes go when someone says the one thing they didn't know they needed. Mara moved on before either of them could feel the weight of it. She was back at the counter writing a ticket when Dennis came up beside her and said in the low compressed voice, table in the back asked for you specifically. She didn't look up from the ticket. I have tables? I'll cover table 4. Go see what they want and move them out. She put the ticket on the wheel and went to the large booth. Rex looked up when she arrived. The 2 men with him, one she knew now, was called Decker. Older gray at the temples, quieter than Colby, shifted slightly to give the exchange space. Sorry to pull you over, Rex said. I know it's busy. Can I get you something? No. He put both arms on the table. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you don't have to answer it. She waited. The man who runs this place, Rex said. How long has he been your boss? Since I started. 4 years. In 4 years, has he ever put his hands on you at work? The question landed with a weight that was out of proportion to its volume. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't leaned forward. He'd asked it the way a doctor asks something clinical, something that requires an honest answer to be of any use. She was aware of Decker looking at his coffee, giving her the courtesy of not watching. She was aware of the lunch noise around them, all of it continuing without awareness of this particular exchange. She was aware of Dennis somewhere behind her on the floor. That's a personal question, she said. It is, Rex agreed. You don't have to answer it. She looked at the table. No, not at work. The qualifier arrived without her choosing it. She heard it land. Rex heard it land. The silence that followed had the particular density of a silence that contains something that has been said by not being said. Okay, Rex said. Same word he'd used that morning, but this time it was different. This okay was not acceptance. It was acknowledgement. It was, I heard what you didn't say and I'm not going to make you say it until you're ready. Is there anything else I can get you? She asked. No, he said. Thank you, Mara. She walked back to the counter. Her face was completely composed. She was exceptional at that. She had built it over years the way a craftsman builds something that needs to hold weight with care, with repetition, with the understanding that the alternative to holding was collapse and collapse was not available. She picked up 2 plates from the window and delivered them and smiled and said, enjoy, and turned back toward the counter. That was when Dennis dropped the tray. Not literally. That was when Dennis detonated. It started with a ticket, a wrong ticket, or so he said, a lunch order that had gone to the wrong table, which Mara was 70% certain had nothing to do with her section, and 100% certain was not the actual cause of what was happening. But the ticket was the trigger he reached for, because the lunch rush provided cover, and the bikers at the back booth had been eroding something in him all morning, and now it was noon, and they were still there, and something had to give somewhere. He came at her in this middle of the floor. Not the hallway, not the office. The middle of the floor, tables on 3 sides, customers at most of them, the kitchen window, visible from where they stood, the counter to her left, with Earl's replacement stool occupying someone she didn't recognize. The Henderson order, he said. Not yelling, never yelling. The compressed voice turned up. Table 6. Where did it go? I didn't have table 6 this rotation. It has your handwriting on the ticket. Then I wrote it wrong in the system, but the table isn't. You don't write it wrong, Mara. That's the whole job. Take the order, write it correctly, get it to the kitchen. He was close, not touching, never needing to. This is what I've been saying. This is what I've been saying all morning. You're distracted, you're slow, you're making mistakes that cost this place. Dennis, her voice came out level. She hadn't planned that. It just came out level, like it had been waiting somewhere steadier than she felt. He stopped. The stop itself was its own event. She almost never interrupted. She had learned very early not to interrupt. The order went to the right table, she said. Table 6 is Sandra's section, and Sandra called out, so you rotated me there without telling me, and I covered it without complaint. The ticket is correct. He stared at her. She stared back. For the first time in 4 years, she did not look at the middle of his chest. Something in his face went very flat and very cold, which was worse than the compressed voice, which was worse than anything that came with noise, because the flat cold was what preceded things that left marks. You want to be careful, he said quietly. You want to be very careful right now. I think, said a voice from the direction of the large booth, she's being plenty careful. The diner went quiet, not the partial quiet of attention. The full quiet of every person in the room registering simultaneously that something had shifted from ordinary to not ordinary. Forks paused, coffee cups halted. The kitchen noise continued behind the window, but the floor went still. Rex Malone had not raised his voice. He had spoken at a volume appropriate for the distance between the booth and where she and Dennis were standing. But the quality of the voice, the absolute 0-degree calm of it, the absence of anything resembling uncertainty, carried through the room like it had been broadcast. He was standing now. She hadn't heard him get up. He was just standing a few feet from the booth. Both hands relaxed at his sides, and he was looking at Dennis Frell with the specific expression of a man who has made a quiet decision. Dennis turned. And the thing that happened on his face in that moment, the thing that shifted from flat cold to something else, something that had, underneath it, the structural quality of fear, dressed in the clothes of offense. That thing told her everything about what Dennis Frell actually was, beneath everything he had built around himself in this diner over however many years. This is a private conversation, Dennis said. It was, Rex said. Then it got loud enough for the room. You're a customer. That's right. Then I'd appreciate you staying in your... That's not how you treat someone. Rex's voice didn't change register, didn't sharpen, didn't go harder. It just arrived, and it arrived with the finality of something that had already happened. That's not how you talk to someone in front of other people. That's not how you talk to someone at all. Dennis took 2 seconds to respond, which was 2 seconds too long, and everyone in the diner felt it. I run this business, Dennis said. I decide how. I know you run it, Rex said. I've been watching you run it all morning. The sentence sat in the air. Earl Potts back on his stool, she hadn't seen him return, but there he was, put his coffee cup down with a small sound that was the only sound in the room. Dennis looked at Mara, and what was in that look was the thing she had spent 4 years learning to read before it arrived, the calculation, the repositioning, the decision about whether this was the moment to press or the moment to retreat and press later. Harder where no one was watching, he chose retreat. She saw him choose it. We'll talk later, he said to her. And the we'll talk later carried its full freight, and she felt it in her shoulders, and she kept her face level because Rex was still standing there, and the room was still quiet, and she was not going to give Dennis the satisfaction of her flinching while witnesses existed. Dennis walked back toward the register. The room began to exhale. Rex looked at her. His face asked nothing. It simply remained available, open, present, steady, waiting for whatever she decided to do with the next 10 seconds. Thank you, she said, low, just for him. Don't thank me, he said. That should have been said a long time ago by somebody who worked here. He went back to his booth. She stood in the middle of the floor for 1 full second, which was the longest she'd stood still all day. Then she went and got the coffee carafe, and she moved to table 3 and said, warm that up for you. And the woman at table 3 said, yes, please, and the diner resumed its noise and its motion and its ordinary surface. But something beneath the ordinary surface had cracked. She could feel it the way you feel a crack in ice underfoot. Not visible yet, but structural. The kind that doesn't heal just because you stop stepping on it. Linda Garver stopped her at 1 o'clock. She'd been getting her coat from the hook by the door, leaving finally after her extended morning, and she caught Mara's wrist as she passed, not hard, just enough, and said very quietly, you know my number. Mara looked at her. I know you know it, Linda said. I'm saying use it, whatever time. Okay. She walked out before Mara could build any kind of answer. 3 minutes later at table 9, a man named Hank Brewer, 60-something, a local contractor who'd been coming to Patty's Corner since the original Patty owned it, stopped her when she brought his check. Hey, he said, What Rex did earlier. She waited. Was right, Hank said. Should have been said. He looked at the check. You're not the first person he's done that to. Not even close. He put money on the table and didn't look at her again, the way men sometimes didn't look at you when they were ashamed of something they'd stood by too long. She took the check holder. She went back to the counter. She put both hands flat on the surface and took one breath that was different from all the other breaths she'd taken that day, longer, deeper, arriving from somewhere lower than her lungs. And she looked at the counter in front of her and let the thing Hank Brewer had said exist without immediately packaging it into something manageable. Not the first person, not the first. Which meant she had not been unlucky, had not been uniquely difficult, uniquely clumsy, uniquely deserving of the particular education she'd been receiving for 4 years at Patty's Corner Diner. There had been others who had stood in this exact spot with a tray in their hands and a bruise under their makeup in a story they'd packaged into ordinary language because the alternative required a next that they couldn't see yet. The thought arrived with the specific weight of a thing you've known for a long time that you haven't let yourself know. She pressed her hands flat against the counter and she held it, and she did not cry because she had somewhere to be and tables to cover and a 7-year-old who needed her to be functional and intact. But she felt it fully for those 10 seconds. She felt it completely. And then she picked up the carafe and went back to work. Rex was watching her from the booth. She didn't look away this time. She held his eyes for 3 full seconds, which was the longest she'd held anyone's eyes in longer than she could calculate. And then she moved to her next table. His coffee was still full. He wasn't drinking it. He had no intention of leaving. And for the first time since 6:45 that morning, Mara Calloway let herself feel the full shape of what that meant, not as danger, not as complication, not as a problem that needed managing, but as the thing it actually was. Someone had stopped. Someone had stayed. Someone had looked directly at the thing she'd been holding alone in both hands for 4 years and had not looked away from it. In Table 4's section, the young mother was buckling her baby into the carrier, and as she passed Mara, she said, "Have a good one," the way strangers do, the automatic courtesy of a day continuing forward. "You too," Mara said, and meant something by it. For the first time in, she couldn't say how long she meant it. Behind her, Dennis Frell stood at the register with his jaw locked and his eyes moving between her and the large booth, running the calculation that men like him always ran when the ground shifted under them, measuring, repositioning, deciding. And across the diner, Hank Brewer sat with his paid check and did not leave. Earl was back on his stool. Rex Malone set his coffee cup down and waited. The diner moved around all of them, ordinary and loud, and full of the small transactions of a Tuesday lunch hour in Maple Ridge. But something had broken open in the middle of it that no amount of ordinary noise was going to close again. Dennis didn't say another word to her for the rest of the lunch hour. That was the thing she noticed first, not the relief of it, but the texture. 4 years had trained her to read his silences the way a sailor reads weather. And this silence was different from the ones she knew. The usual Dennis silence was a held breath, a pressure system building towards something that would arrive on his schedule, in his chosen location with the audience he preferred, which was no audience at all. This silence was something else. This was the silence of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. He stayed at the register. He processed tickets. He spoke to the kitchen once about a late order and to Colby twice about nothing she could hear. He did not come to the floor. He did not pull her to the hallway. He did not deploy the low-compressed voice or the close standing or any of the instruments she had spent 4 years cataloging. He watched Rex Malone from across the diner, and he did the arithmetic, and he stayed at the register. Rex, for his part, did nothing dramatic. He drank coffee he didn't need. He talked quietly with Decker. He watched the room the way he'd been watching it all morning, not fixed on anything, not broadcasting attention, just present and absorbing and unhurried. 2 of his other guys came back in around 1:15, ate lunch, occupied a second table without making anything of it. They were simply there, densely, undeniably, patiently there. And Maple Ridge's Tuesday lunch crowd ate around all of it and paid their checks and left, but slower than usual. Mara noticed that too, the ordinary cadence of a lunch hour, which was people arriving with appetite and leaving with purpose, had stretched. People were lingering, not because the food was slow, because the room had a quality that made people reluctant to stop being in it. Hank Brewer was still at his table at 1:30. He had ordered pie after his check, which meant he had paid and then ordered again, which Hank Brewer had never done in Mara's 4 years of knowing him. Earl was on his third coffee. Linda had gone, but Mara had the feeling she was not far. At 1:40, Rex stood up from the booth. Mara's chest moved without permission. He didn't head for the door. He walked to the counter, easy direct, no theater, and sat down on one of the stools 3 seats from Earl. And when Mara came over, because that was what you did when someone sat at the counter, and he said, "Can I get a glass of water in a minute?" She got the water. She stood across the counter from him. He put both forearms on the surface and leaned in slightly. Not aggressively, the body language of a man who wanted to be heard without being overheard. "I'm going to ask you some things," he said, "and I want you to know you're not in any trouble. Nothing you say leaves this counter unless you want it to." She looked at him. "Okay. How many people have worked here in the last 4 years, staff?" "Not you." The question was specific enough that it required actual thought. She counted in her head the real counting, not the automatic social response. 7, maybe 8, not counting the kitchen. How many left on their own terms? She opened her mouth, closed it, did the real count again. 2, she said. Tom Gifford retired. He'd been here since the original owner. And a college girl, Becca, who left when she went back to school. The others, she looked at the counter between them. Dennis let them go, or they left, suddenly. Suddenly. 1 week they were here, next week they weren't. Were any of them women? 4 of them, she said, without saying it. 4 of them, and she had not known 2 of them well enough to have had a real conversation, and the 3rd she'd liked enough to notice the absence, and the 4th Jenny Marsh she had never asked about, because asking would have required the kind of attention to her own situation that she had learned to not pay. Most of them, she said. Rex nodded slowly. His expression didn't change, but she could see him filing it, the specific methodical filing of someone who had walked into a building and was now drawing its floor plan from memory. "Mara," he said, "the bruise." She stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, "but I need to ask because I've been looking at it since 9 this morning, and I'm not going to pretend I haven't." She looked at the water glass in front of him. "I walked into a cabinet door." "Okay," he said. She looked up. "I know that's what you're going to say," Rex said. "I'm not calling you a liar. I'm saying the cabinet door explanation is one I've heard before, and it's one I've never once found to be true." The lunch noise around them was thinning. 3 tables still occupied. Hank at his pie. The kitchen cycling down. Earl at his stool not appearing to listen, which was Earl's version of listening intensely. "My life is not your business," she said. Her voice was even. Not cold, she didn't have the energy for cold, just honest. "You're right," Rex said. "It's not." He turned the water glass slightly. "I'm not trying to make it my business. I'm trying to let you know that if you ever decided to make it someone else's business, for your own reasons on your own timeline, there are people who know how to help with that, without drama, without making things worse before they get better." She said, "Things like what?" "Things like what happens when someone realizes they're not as alone as they thought." The sentence sat between them on the counter, and she let it sit there, and she did not build an ordinary explanation around it. It was Earl who moved first. He set his coffee down 2 seats from Rex and said without preamble, without looking at either of them, "Jenny Marsh." Mara went still. Rex looked at Earl. "Waitress here," Earl said. "Before Mara's time, mostly. Overlapped by a few months." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "Good worker. Quiet girl. Had a little boy about ye-high." He indicated a height with his hand. "She was here about 1.5 years, and then she wasn't." "What happened?" Rex asked. "Official version," Earl said. "Personal issues. That's what Dennis told people who asked. Personal issues, family situation couldn't make the schedule work." He paused. "Unofficial version is she came in one morning with a split lip and Dennis told her she looked unprofessional and sent her home, and she never came back." He looked at his cup. "I heard she moved to her sister's place in Harriton. I heard that from my neighbor whose daughter went to school with Jenny's boy." Rex said nothing. He was doing that thing where his silence was doing more work than most people's sentences. "Before Jenny," Earl continued, "there was a woman named Cora. I don't know her last name. She was only here maybe 4 months. Dennis let her go for what he called performance issues. Earl's voice had the flat, measured quality of a man reciting a list he found distasteful but necessary. Cora used to take the long way out of the parking lot around the back, so she wasn't walking to her car alone. Mara looked at the counter. She had taken the long way out of the parking lot. She had done it so long, she had stopped knowing that she was doing it. It had become the route the way certain routes become the route until you forget there's another way. I'm not telling you this to alarm anybody, Earl said. I'm telling you because I've been sitting on that stool for 11 years, and I've watched this place and I've watched the women who worked in it, and I've let a lot of things go past me that I should have said something about, and he stopped. His jaw moved. I'm not going to do that again. The diner was very quiet. Rex looked at Mara. She was looking at Earl with an expression that was not crying. She was not going to cry. She refused to cry. Not here, not in this building, not where Dennis could see it through the register window, but that was adjacent to it, close enough that it was taking real effort to maintain the distinction. Earl, she said. Don't, he said. Don't thank me either. I'm about 12 years late and I know it. Rex said, is there anyone else in this town who would talk? Earl considered. Hank Brewer might have something. He's been contracting in this town longer than me, knows more people. He looked across the diner. He's still sitting there. Rex stood from the stool. Mara said, Rex. He paused. You're not going to... She stopped, recalibrated. What are you going to do? He looked at her with the steady, clear gray eyes. I'm going to have a conversation with Hank Brewer, he said. That's all. I'm not going to do anything that makes your life harder than it already is. That's a promise I'm making you right now. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to run whatever internal calculus she still had the capacity for and reach the end of it. She nodded. He walked to Hank Brewer's table. She watched from the counter as Rex sat down across from Hank without asking. And Hank, rather than showing offense, rather than the territorial stiffening of a man whose space has been entered without invitation, simply looked at Rex and then looked at Mara, and then looked back at Rex and started talking. She couldn't hear it. The distance was too great, but she watched Hank's hands, which he used when he was being serious about something, the contractor's hands, calloused and deliberate, laying out points like measurements. She watched Rex listen. She watched the conversation take on weight as it continued the way a conversation gains gravity when what's being said has been waiting to be said. Dennis was watching from the register. She saw the exact moment Dennis understood what was happening at that table. She saw it in the stillness that replaced his motion, the absolute complete arrest of movement that was the opposite of his usual purposeful activity. He had gone as still as a man who has heard a sound in the dark and is determining its direction. It was Decker who came to the counter next. She hadn't spoken to Decker all day. He'd been the quiet one, the older one, the one who watched the room with the same quality Rex did, but with the particular wariness of someone who had watched many rooms over many years. He sat down where Rex had been and looked at the counter. Can I get coffee? He said. She poured it. He wrapped his hands around the cup. You know what Rex did before he rode? He said. No. Sheriff's deputy, 3 counties over back in the 90s. He looked at the coffee. 12 years. Saw a lot. He paused. Left because of a situation where the department wouldn't do what needed doing about someone who was hurting people they had authority over. He paused again. Rex does not like that situation. It is the one thing in the world that Rex Malone will not drive past. She absorbed that. He's not law enforcement anymore, Decker said. He doesn't pretend to be, but he knows who to call. He knows how things work, and he knows when there's enough to work with. He took a sip of coffee. He's going to ask you something when he comes back. You don't have to say yes. Nobody here is going to think less of you, whatever you decide. What's he going to ask? Decker looked at her directly. Whether you'd be willing to talk to someone who has a legal obligation to take it seriously. That's all. One conversation, one phone call. The rest is up to you and only you. She looked across the diner at Rex, who was still at Hank's table, and at Hank, whose hands had stopped moving, and who was now sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has said something he has been holding a long time, and who is both lighter and heavier for having said it. She thought about Jenny Marsh taking the long way around the parking lot. She thought about Cora, whose last name nobody knew. She thought about Jake, 7 years old, whose shoes had needed replacing for 3 weeks, and who had said last Tuesday with the specific cruelty of 7-year-old honesty, "Mommy, why do you always look tired?" She had told him she was fine. Of course she had told him she was fine. He had looked at her with his eyes that were too old for seven and said, "You can tell me stuff you know." She had told him she knew that and kissed the top of his head and turned away before he could see her face. She looked at Decker. "What kind of someone?" she asked. "County Social Services," he said. "And if there's enough, and I think there might be enough, potentially the DA's office." He watched her process that. Not today, not this minute, but in the direction of. "It takes time," she said, not a question, a statement of what she knew about how these things worked, which was that they took time and generated attention. And during the time and the attention, you were still in the place you were in, still walking past the register, still taking the long way to your car. "It takes some time," Decker said honestly, "but there are ways to make the time safer. That's part of what Rex is good at." She looked at the counter. "I have a 7-year-old. "I know," Decker said. "Rex knows. That's not a complication. That's part of why this matters." She said nothing for 30 seconds. Decker didn't fill the silence. He drank his coffee and let her be where she was with it. Then Rex came back from Hank's table and sat down. He looked at her with the same face he'd been wearing all day. Clear. Steady, nothing in it that required anything from her. "Hank knew 2 other women," he said. "Besides what Earl told us. That's at least 4 people that we can document with names and rough timelines. Potentially more." He paused. "That's not nothing, Mara. That's a pattern." She looked at him. "I know what I'm asking you to think about," he said. "Yeah, I know it's not small. I know it's not simple. And I know that you have been managing something for a long time, that you've managed completely alone, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you this is easy because it's not." He leaned forward slightly, the same posture as before, present, not pressing. "But those other women," he said, "they didn't have a pattern documented. They didn't have 4 names and a timeline and a contractor who's willing to talk and an old postal carrier who's been watching this place for 11 years. He waited. "You have all of that, right now, today." She looked at him. She thought about this bruise that was 4 days old. She thought about the one before it, which had been 3 weeks ago, and which she'd told Jake was from a door, and which Jake had looked at with his 7-year-old face arranged in a way that told her he did not entirely believe her. She thought about the specific quality of her son's not believing the fact that a 7-year-old had learned to calibrate her explanations meant that the explanations had required calibration for long enough that he'd noticed. That was the thing that moved her, not herself, Jake. Jake looking at her with eyes too old for 7. "If I talked to someone," she said, "officially, what would that look like?" Rex said, "A conversation. Somewhere you choose, nobody coming to the diner, nobody making noise. Just a conversation with someone who takes notes." "And Dennis wouldn't—" "Not immediately," Rex said. "Not without your say-so on the timing. We can control the timing." She looked at the counter. She looked up. "Decker said you were a deputy," she said. Rex's expression shifted, not surprise, just a slight adjustment of a man whose past has been mentioned. "Long time ago." "Why did you leave?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because I watched the chief of police in a small town hurt someone who worked for him," he said. "And I filed reports, and I documented it, and I went through every channel I was supposed to go through. And the channels said thank you and filed the paperwork, and nothing happened." His voice was even. "So I left, and I decided that when I saw something, I wasn't going to file it somewhere. I was going to stay in the room until it moved." She said nothing. "I'm still in the room," he said. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that Decker looked at his coffee and Earl across the counter became very interested in something on the far wall. "There's a diner in the next town," she said finally. "Henderson's. My friend Beth works there. She's been telling me for 2 years they're hiring." She paused. "I never applied because Dennis said if I left, he'd make sure I didn't work anywhere in the county." Rex said, "He say that once or more than once, enough times that I stopped thinking it wasn't true." Rex said, "It's not true, Simone. Not with heat, just with the simple flatness of a fact. A man like that says things like that because they work, because the person hearing them is isolated enough and tired enough that the threat feels real. It's not legal. It's not possible. And I can tell you that with something approaching certainty because I've watched men like Dennis Frell my entire adult life, and I know exactly what they can and cannot do when someone stops believing the threat." The diner had emptied to the point where only Hank and Earl and two strangers at a back table remained. Dennis had disappeared into the office she'd watched him go 15 minutes ago, and he hadn't come back out, which was its own thing, its own telling, silence. Beth would give you a reference, Mara said, slowly, half to herself. Probably, Rex said. Jake's school is closer to Henderson's than it is to here. Is it? She looked up. Rex's face was doing nothing dramatic. He was not celebrating. He was not leaning into the moment with any kind of pressure. He was simply still in the room, same as he'd been since 9 in the morning, and he was going to be still in the room for as long as it took. What I said before, she said, about not being the first. I know. Those women, she said, do you think any of them, she stopped, started again. Do you think they're okay? Rex considered the question seriously. She could see him giving it real weight rather than the easy answer. I think some of them are, he said, and I think some of them are still carrying this. And I think the ones who are still carrying it would feel different if someone had built enough of a case that it didn't come down to just their word against his. She nodded twice. Small. Okay, she said. Rex said, okay. I'll talk to someone. She straightened. Not today. I need to get Jake from school at 3, and I need to think, and she stopped. I need one night to sit with it. That's fair, Rex said. She said, will you still be? We're in Maple Ridge until Thursday, he said. We got a place out on the Creston Road. Motel there. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and put a card on the counter. Plain white. A phone number and the name, Rex, no last name, no other information. That's my cell, day or night. She looked at the card. She did not pick it up. I'm going to finish my shift, she said. Yep, Rex said. She picked up the card. She folded it once and put it in the pocket of her apron where she kept her order pad and 2 pens and a hair tie she'd been meaning to return to her wrist since 7 that morning. Then she picked up the coffee carafe and she turned and she went to check on the 2 strangers at the back table because that was her job, and she was going to do it with the same precision she had brought to every other moment of this day, but the card was in her pocket and she could feel the small, rectangular weight of it against her hip, and it was the most significant thing she had carried in 4 years. Behind her at the counter, Rex Malone picked up his water glass and finished it and set it down. And for the first time all day, he looked like a man who might eventually rest. She finished her shift at 2:45, 15 minutes early, which Dennis permitted without comment, which was itself a statement. He came out of the office at 2:30, moved through the floor with the clipped efficiency of a man performing normalcy for an audience. He was pretending wasn't there. And when she told him she needed to leave at 2:45 for school pickup, he said, fine, and went back to the register. Fine, one word, no friction, no negotiation, no manufactured reason to make her stay. He had never once let her leave early without extracting something for it. She untied her apron in the back and held it for a moment before hanging it on the hook. 4 years of shifts. The fabric had softened in specific places. The front pocket where she kept her pad, the strings from being knotted and unknotted several hundred times. It was just an apron. She hung it and picked up her bag and walked out the back. The card was still in her jacket pocket. She'd moved it there during the last hour so she'd feel it against her ribs instead of her hip. Closer. She wasn't sure why that mattered, but it did. Rex's guys had cleared out around 2. She'd watched them go in small groups, no ceremony, no announcement, just men finishing their coffee and moving toward their bikes with the same ease they'd arrived with. Rex had been the last one out, and he'd paused at the door and looked back at her across the diner, and she'd been at table 7, and they'd been 20 feet apart, and he'd simply nodded the way you nod at someone when you don't need words to complete the sentence. She'd nodded back. Now she walked to her car and sat in it for 2 minutes before starting the engine. The card was in her pocket. She put her hand on it through the fabric and held it there and looked at the steering wheel and took 3 breaths that were longer than her regular breathing, which was always slightly compressed, always slightly held the permanent posture of a person who had learned that too much breath in meant too much feeling, moving. She started the car and drove to Jake's school. Back to him. He came out the side door at 2:58 with his backpack riding low and his laces undone on the left shoe, which was a permanent condition she'd given up correcting because he untied them again within 4 minutes. Anyway, something about the rhythm of it, she decided something that occupied the part of his brain that ran at a frequency slightly faster than everything around him. He got in the back seat, threw the backpack, said, "We having noodles tonight," before his door was closed. "Hi to you too," she said. "Hi, noodles, maybe." She checked the mirror, pulled out of the lot. "How was school?" Tyler said a word he's not allowed to say and got sent to the office, and it was the best thing that happened all week. "It's Tuesday." "I know, it was really good." He was already pulling at the backpack zipper. "We had art. I made something." "What did you make?" A pause. "It's for you, so you can't look until later." "Okay," she said. "Ms. Perkins said it was excellent." "Ms. Perkins has good taste," he said, "Mommy." The shift in register from talking about Tyler and art to this, the other frequency, arrived without warning, the way it always did with him, without any of the preamble adults used to signal that a different kind of conversation was beginning. "You seem different." She kept her eyes on the road. "Different how?" "I don't know. Less." He paused, searching. "Less like you're carrying something heavy." She gripped the wheel. 7 years old. 7. "I'm okay, buddy," and she said, "I know," he said. "That's what I mean. You sound like you actually mean it this time." She didn't answer that. She couldn't answer that with her voice in the condition it was currently in. She drove and he went back to his backpack, and she held the wheel at 10 and 2 and breathed through it until the tightness passed. She put Jake to bed at 8:30. Read him 2 chapters of the book. They were in the middle of something about a kid who discovers a door in his grandmother's basement that leads somewhere improbable. And Jake asked 3 questions per page the way he always did, which made 2 chapters take 45 minutes, which she did not mind, because 45 minutes of Jake asking questions about an improbable door was the most normal 45 minutes she'd had in longer than she could calculate. When he was asleep, she sat on the edge of his bed for a moment. His face in sleep was the version of him that was purely himself, stripped of the speed and the energy and the untied shoelaces. He looked in sleep like the specific person he was becoming, not a small version of an adult, but something distinct and in progress and entirely his own. She looked at him for a long time. Then she got up, went to the kitchen table, sat down, and took the card out of her pocket. She had looked at it 6 times since 2:45. She knew the number by heart already. She had the kind of memory that did that, retain things she looked at repeatedly without being asked to, but she looked at it again anyway. Rex, 10 digits. No last name, no title, no explanation. She turned it over, blank on the back. She set it on the table in front of her, and she sat with it, the way he had sat in that booth all morning patiently without forcing anything, letting the thing be what it was until she knew what to do with it. She thought about Jenny Marsh, the split lip, the long way around the parking lot that had eventually become just the way Jenny went until Jenny didn't go anywhere near Patty's Corner at all. She thought about Cora, no last name, 4 months. She thought about the women Earl didn't mention because he didn't know about them. The ones before his 11 years on the stool, the ones that had moved through that building and left pieces of themselves there and driven away and built other explanations for the shape of their lives afterward. She thought about what Rex had said the ones who are still carrying it would feel different if someone had built enough of a case that it didn't come down to just their word against his. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She dialed. It rang twice. "Yeah," Rex's voice. Awake, clear, unsurprised, the voice of someone who had been waiting without anticipating, which was its own skill. "It's Mara," she said. "I know," he said. She said, "I thought about it." "Okay." "All of it. The things Earl said, what Hank told you, the other women." She paused. "I thought about my son." Silence on the line. The good kind. The kind that held space rather than filling it. "I want to talk to someone," she said. "Officially, whatever that looks like. I want to do it before I lose the nerve, which means I need it to happen soon." Rex said, "How's tomorrow morning before your shift?" "I open at 6:45. I can have someone at the Henderson's Diner the next town over at 6. Quiet. Just you and her and coffee. Her name is Diane Marsh." He paused. "No relation to Jenny, just a coincidence. She's county, social services, but she's worked with the DA's office before. She knows how this goes. She's been doing it a long time, and she's good at it." Another pause. "You'd just be talking. Nothing is filed without your signature. Nothing moves without you saying move." Mara said, "What if Dennis finds out I talked to someone?" Rex said, he won't, not tomorrow. And by the time anything official is in motion, you'll have options that make his finding out a different calculation than it is right now. She thought about that, ran it. What kind of options? Beth at Henderson's, Rex said. I called her this afternoon. She said the position's still open and she'd hold it a week if you needed. The air in her kitchen changed. She sat at her table and she looked at the card and she felt the full weight of what Rex Malone had done with a Tuesday he had apparently decided to spend in Maple Ridge. Not just the words in the diner, not just the standing up in front of Dennis, but this, the logistics, the next steps, the actual architecture of a different possible reality built quietly and without announcement while she was still pouring coffee and performing ordinary. You called Beth, she said. You mentioned her name, figured it didn't hurt to check. She closed her eyes. Why are you doing all this? A beat. Rex said, because 12 years ago in a different county, in a different diner, I watched something that looked exactly like today, and I drove away from it. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself she had people, she had options, she was going to be fine. His voice stayed even. She wasn't fine. I've known that for 12 years, and I've been doing what I could with that information ever since. She opened her eyes. I'm not here to fix your life, Mara, he said. I'm here so you don't face it alone. She heard the sentence arrive and she did not immediately package it or contain it or build a reasonable explanation around it. She let it land where it landed. She let it mean what it meant. 6 o'clock at Henderson's, she said, I'll text you when Diane confirms. Okay, she paused. My son made me something in art today. He said Ms. Perkins called it excellent. A short silence. Then quietly, what did he make? I haven't seen it yet. It's in his bag. He said it's for me, so I had to wait. Rex said, go look at it. She almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her. Its location, its texture, the fact that it existed at all after the particular architecture of this day. I will, she said. Thank you, Rex. Get some sleep, he said. She hung up. She sat at the table for 30 more seconds. Then she got up and went to Jake's backpack and unzipped the front pocket, where she'd watched him put something carefully with the deliberate hands of a child protecting something fragile. It was a drawing, tempera paint on heavy paper slightly crinkled at one edge where it had dried unevenly. 2 figures. One tall, one small, holding hands rendered with the honest imprecision of a 7-year-old who was working from feeling rather than observation. The tall figure had yellow-brown hair and was wearing what appeared to be a red apron. The small figure had a backpack. Above them in Jake's block printing uneven but legible, My Mom is Strong. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because her legs gave out, they didn't. She sat down deliberately with the paper in both hands because the floor was where she was, and where she was felt like the right place to let this particular thing be real. She did not cry. She sat on the floor of her kitchen with her son's painting in her hands, and she breathed, and she let herself be seen by no one, by the empty room, by the version of herself that had been holding everything for 4 years, and she let it be enough for right now. Then she put the painting on the kitchen table where she'd see it in the morning, and she went to bed. She woke before the alarm. 5:10, dark, the specific silence of early morning that is different from late-night silence, more forward-leaning, more like something waiting than something ended. She lay still for a moment and took inventory of herself the way she always did, first thing the automatic survey of what the day ahead required and what she had available to meet it. What she had available felt for the first time in a long time like it might be enough. She dress-checked on Jake, still out sprawled sideways in his characteristic way that suggested sleep had caught him mid-motion, and he'd surrendered horizontally and left a note on the kitchen table next to the painting, at work early. Mrs. Dobbs has the key. I love you to the moon and back and all the roads in between. She drove to Henderson's. Diane Marsh was already there, mid-50s, reading glasses on a legal pad on the table in front of her, a coffee she'd started. She stood when Mara came in, not formally, just the acknowledgement of a woman who understood the significance of showing up. Mara, she said, I'm Diane. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here early, Mara said. This is the good part of my job, Diane said, and there was nothing performative in it. She said it the way you say something you've found to be true over many years and have stopped needing to dress up. They sat. Mara put her hands around a coffee cup she hadn't ordered yet, and Beth appeared from somewhere and poured it without being asked, touching Mara's shoulder once as she passed light as a wing. Diane said, "Tell me about working at Patty's Corner," and Mara told her. She told her all of it, not in the packaged ordinary version, not in the version that explained and minimized and redirected toward the reasonable. She told it in the order it happened, and she named the name she knew, and she described what had been described, and she said the words she had not said out loud to anyone, not even to Linda Garver with her phone number, not even to Beth on the phone when she'd cried 6 months ago without explaining why. She said them now. Diane wrote, occasionally she asked a question precise, non-leading the questions of someone who needed specific information and knew how to ask for it without shaping the answer. She did not make sounds of sympathy that required response. She did not perform horror. She simply listened and wrote and occasionally asked, and Mara talked for 40 minutes without stopping. When she was done, Diane put her pen down. "What you've described," she said carefully, "combined with what I was told about Earl Potts and Hank Brewer, and potentially 2 or 3 other women, this is more than a pattern. This is a documented course of conduct." She looked at Mara directly. "What you're describing is actionable. I want to be clear about that. I'm not promising outcomes. I'm telling you this is real. It's documentable, and you are not the only person who experienced it." Mara nodded. "I'm going to need to involve one other person in the next step," Diane said. "Someone in the DA's office who handles workplace misconduct and domestic adjacent cases. She's good. She is very, very good. But I need your permission before I make that call." Mara said, "Make the call." Diane looked at her. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since last night," Mara said. "I just needed to say it out loud to someone who could do something with it." Diane nodded. She picked up her phone and stepped away from the table. Beth came back and sat down across from Mara in Diane's vacated chair. "Hey," Beth said. "Hey," Mara said. "You okay?" Mara looked at her friend, the person who had been telling her for 2 years that there was a job here and a reference waiting and a life that could be organized differently if she decided to organize it. She looked at Beth and felt the specific texture of what it meant to have someone who had held a door open long after it would have been reasonable to let it close. "I think so," Mara said. "Not all the way, but in that direction." Beth said, "That's enough. That's plenty." She was back in her car by 6:40 with 20 minutes before her shift. She sat in the Henderson's lot and looked at her phone. Rex had texted at 6:15. "How'd it go?" She typed back, "Good, really good. Diana's making a call. 3 dots. Then good. Then a beat later. Jake see the painting yet?" She smiled at her phone. An actual smile, not the performed one, not the professional one, not the one she kept in the safety kit. The other one. The one that came from somewhere that hadn't been accessed in long enough that the muscles felt slightly unfamiliar with the shape. She typed, "Not yet. He'll see it after school." "Rex, tell him Ms. Perkins was right." She put the phone in her bag and drove to Patty's Corner. Dennis was there when she arrived. He was in the office door open, and he came out when he heard her clocking in, came out with the deliberate timing of someone who had been waiting and wanted her to know they'd been waiting. She tied her apron strings, both knots the way she always did. He stood in the hallway and looked at her with the flat assessment expression, the one that took her measure and reported the result directly back to the register, where he kept his running calculation of what she was and what she owed him and what she would do when pressed. She looked back at him, not at his chest, at his face, full and direct. Something moved across his expression, the arithmetic running again. Different numbers this time. "Early," he said. "I had something to do," she said. "Everything all right?" The question was not concern, it was information gathering. She knew the difference. She had spent 4 years learning every instrument in his kit. "Everything's fine," she said, and walked out to the floor. Rex arrived at 8 in, not with the full convoy this time, just 4 bikes easy, pulling into the lot like they'd been there before and planned to come back, which they had, which they did. He came through the door and took the same large booth in the back, and Mara brought coffee without being asked and set it down, and he looked up at her and she looked down at him. "Diane called her contact," Mara said, quietly. "No one nearby. She said there'll be a meeting next week. Formal. She said the pattern of documentation as her word was strong." Rex said, "Good." "I talked to Beth this morning," Mara said. Before Diane got there, just for a minute, the position is real. 2 weeks notice and it's mine. Rex said nothing. He looked at his coffee. I'm going to give notice, she said. End of the week. I want to do it right. I want to do it on my terms, not run out. Rex looked up. That's your call. You sure? I'm sure, she said. And the thing about saying it was that she was sure. The certainty was not loud or shaky or requiring of its own convincing. It sat in her chest with the comfortable weight of something that had been true for a long time and had finally been allowed to take up its actual space. Earl's going to come in this morning, Rex said. He texted Decker, which I didn't know was a thing that was happening, but apparently they exchanged numbers yesterday. He looked almost amused by that. He said he's bringing Hank. What for? I think they want to be here, Rex said, for whatever today is. She thought about that, Earl on his stool, Hank at his table. Two men who had watched things go past for too long and had decided in the space of one Tuesday that they weren't going to watch anymore. Okay, she said. She picked up the carafe and moved to the next table. Dennis emerged from the back at 8:15 and stopped when he saw the booth. Stopped completely. 4 bikers, Rex at the center, coffee already poured. His face ran through calculations that were no longer adding up correctly. She could see it from where she stood, the reassessment, the repositioning, the specific quality of a man who has maintained control through the mechanism of people believing he had it and who was now in a room where someone had stopped believing that, and the stopping was visible and the visibility was spreading. Earl came in at 8:30, Hank Brewer behind him. They took their usual spot stool table and they ordered their usual things and they settled in with the comfortable permanence of people who were not going anywhere. Dennis looked at the room, at Rex, at Earl, at Hank, at Mara. He went back into the office. The door did not slam. It closed quietly, which was worse than slamming. The quiet was the sound of a man who understood that noise was no longer an instrument available to him. At 9:15, while the morning thinned toward the midday lull, Mara brought Rex his second coffee. He didn't need it. They both knew that. She poured it anyway. He went in the office, she said. I know, Rex said. He's going to come back out. He will, Rex said. And when he does, this room is going to look different to him than any room has looked to him in a long time. Because the room will have an Earl and a Hank and a Diane making phone calls, and a Mara who looked him in the face this morning instead of the chest. He paused. And that changes the arithmetic. She stood with the carafe and looked at him. You're going to be okay, he said, not the way people said it when they meant, please stop needing things from me. The other way. The way that meant I have looked at what you're carrying and I am telling you as someone who knows what things weigh. She said, I know. And she did. For the first time in 4 years, she said, I know in response to you're going to be okay. And both halves of the sentence were true. She moved to the next table. Outside in the lot, the bike sat in the morning light, patient ready, going nowhere yet. And behind the counter where the coffee ran hot and the floor had a board that creaked at table 7, if you stepped on it, wrong. Mara Calloway moved through her last week at Patty's Corner the way she'd moved through every week, with precision, with care, with the deep competence of someone who had learned to do hard things and keep going. Except this time when she reached the end of the shift, there was a direction to walk in, and she had chosen it herself. In Maple Ridge on a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday, a woman who had made herself invisible for 4 years stepped back into the light not because someone rescued her, but because someone stayed in the room long enough for her to remember that she had always had the power to do it herself. And that is the kind of change that doesn't unhappen.